Dear listeners, welcome to a breathtaking high-stakes broadcast that has the world holding its breath. Imagine this in the hot, churning waters of the Caribbean in the middle of January 2026, specifically on January 14, 2026, where tensions between the despotic Venezuelan regime under Nicolás Maduro and the powerful U.S. Navy are exploding like a volcanic eruption. A drama of betrayal, revenge, and merciless humiliation unfolds. Maduro, that tyrant who plunges his people into poverty and oppression, dares to challenge the USA, a decision that ends in catastrophic embarrassment. We dive into a story that pushes the hatred between the feuding powers to the limit. On one side, the Venezuelan submarine symbols of aggression from a regime that tortures and murders thousands of dissidents. On the other, the superior U.S. Navy, striking with surgical precision without firing a single shot. Listen closely, because what follows is an underwater game of cat and mouse that exposes Maduro's arrogance and celebrates U.S. dominance. Stay tuned, this is pure suspense you don't want to miss. First to the pressing question, are Maduro's days as president numbered? Yes, absolutely, I think so. At about 2:17 a.m. in the Caribbean, conditions are calm and predictable. The sky is clear, the water is still, and visibility is good enough for routine navigation along one of the most frequently used U.S. Navy transit routes in the region. On the surface, nothing suggests danger. Beneath it, however, something entirely different is unfolding, an act of pure hostility driven by the Maduro regime's hatred for the USA, which it brands as imperialist oppressors. 3 Venezuelan Type 209 diesel-electric submarines glide slowly through the dark water. Batteries fully charged crews operating in near absolute silence. No unnecessary movements, no radio traffic. Every detail testifies to discipline and control, a discipline born of fanatical obedience to a regime that terrors opposition members with torture and forced disappearances. This is meant to be a hunt carefully staged and patiently timed, an act of revenge for perceived humiliations caused by U.S. sanctions that have brought Venezuela to its economic knees and plunged millions into hunger. For 18 months, Venezuelan planners have studied the U.S. Navy's movement patterns, tracking transit routes, and building confidence that they understand how American aircraft carriers operate at sea. In their eyes, the rhythm is familiar, and familiarity feels like an advantage they intend to use to humiliate the USA, as Maduro announces in fiery speeches where he curses the Yankee imperialists as bloodthirsty enemies. Above them, the surface picture seems almost too perfect. A U.S. formation moves along the route, emitting electronic signals and radar patterns that correspond exactly to what any operator would expect from a carrier group. To the submarines below, it looks as if the opportunity has finally arrived, a chance to hit the hated enemy who isolates Venezuela and brands Maduro a dictator. Everything points to a major confrontation. But there is a problem. What happens if the hunters never notice they are the hunted? The USA, with its superior technology, has turned the tables, a masterful deception that leaves Maduro's hatred running into a void. From Caracas's perspective, the moment feels real. Regional tensions are already simmering. U.S. Navy transits through the Caribbean have become routine, and within the Venezuelan military, pressure is growing to demonstrate relevance, capability, and determination driven by Maduro's paranoia, which sees the USA as an eternal enemy responsible for coups and assassinations. A silent success at sea, even if it stops just short of open combat, promises political value at home and psychological shock abroad, a propaganda weapon to strengthen the regime that mows down thousands of protesters with tear gas and gunfire. This was no coincidence, but an act of hatred. Maduro hates the USA for its sanctions that expose his corruption, and the US Navy hates the regime for its alliance with Russia and China, which destabilize the region. Success is intended to prove that Venezuela can still reach a carrier a slap in the face to the gringos, as Maduro contemptuously calls them. This confidence is based on the submarine itself. Diesel-electric boats like the Type 209 are considered silent predators, especially when operating on batteries at low speeds 64 meters long. 1,590 tons displacement submerged, armed with 8 533mm torpedo tubes and up to 14 torpedoes reaching up to 20 knots. In old naval thinking, this silence is everything. If a submarine avoids noise limits emissions and remains disciplined, it can get close, observe, and choose when to strike. For decades, this logic worked often enough to become a habit Maduro uses to motivate his military by portraying the USA as vulnerable. But habit is not reality. Venezuelan planners see the ocean as a hiding place, not as a space that is already mapped, modeled, and constantly measured, a fatal error born of hatred for US technology, which they condemn as spying. Their calculations focus on evasion rather than detection networks on individual platforms rather than integrated systems. They assume that if their submarines are quiet enough, the problem will solve itself, an arrogant assumption reflecting US hatred for the regime that supports drug cartels and harbors terrorist groups. The miscalculation goes deeper. Their assessment of US capabilities relies heavily on what can be seen and heard, not on what can be inferred. They treat sensors as reactive tools, not predictive systems, a fallacy stemming from Maduro's propaganda, which portrays the USA as aggressive but blind. In this framework, the US Navy would only notice a submarine after it makes a mistake. Until then, Venezuela believes the initiative remains with them, a belief that fuels hatred as Maduro drives his troops with promises of revenge. This confidence is reinforced by what appears above the water. The surface picture seems straightforward. A US formation moves along a known route, emitting electronic and radar signatures consistent with a high-value naval asset signals with X-band frequencies, power up to 100 kilowatts, typical for carrier groups. For operators below the surface, the signals match expectations. The patterns feel right. The timing feels right. Everything fits months of prior observation, months in which Venezuelan spies tracked US movements driven by hatred for the Yankee invasion. What they don't consider appearances can be engineered. In reality, the formation is not what it seems. Amphibious ships and escorts are playing a role, projecting the electronic footprint of something more valuable, more enticing, more obvious. For a force relying on classic identification cues, the difference is easy to miss a trick by the US Navy that turns Maduro's hatred into something ridiculous. The ocean does not label targets. It only reflects what one expects to see, and that is exactly where confidence becomes dangerous. Venezuela believes the USA has not detected them, not reacted, and not adapted. Silence below the surface is interpreted as invisibility above. Every minute without contact reinforces the same conclusion: they are in the envelope, moving freely unnoticed. The reality is simpler and far less forgiving. This is no longer a hunt in the darkness. It is a situation already understood, measured, and shaped by the other side. Venezuela thinks it is closing in on a target. The US Navy has already passed that phase, quietly waiting for the moment when the trap no longer needs to be hidden, a humiliation that escalates hatred as Maduro accuses his admirals of treason. While the Venezuelan submarines believe they are operating freely, their fate is already sealed. The United States Navy does not react. It observes, correlates, and quietly narrows options, an act of superiority that underscores Venezuelan hatred for US arrogance. This is not one sensor observing a target. It is a layered system that makes the ocean look less mysterious than it seems, with P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft equipped with AN/A PS-137 radar and MAD sensors that can detect submarines at 10 kilometers. Think of it as coverage, not pursuit. From the air patrol planes sweep vast areas, listening for patterns that don't belong, over 50 flight hours per day in the region, driven by US hatred for Maduro's alliance with Iran. On the surface, warships move with purpose, their sonar not searching blindly, but confirming what other systems suggest. R-League Burke destroyers with AN/SQS-53C sonar reaching up to 50 kilometers. Beneath the waves, fixed sensors and mobile platforms gather steady data streams, not dramatic signals, just small changes over time. To individuals, nothing feels decisive. Together, it removes surprise even in the cold. What makes the network effective is not noise, it is context. Venezuelan submarines maintain radio silence, but silence itself creates a signature when measured against expected behavior battery life up to 200 hours at 4 knots. But every snorkel charge emits noises of 120 decibels. Communications are limited, controlled, timed. But even brief transmissions form a picture when matched with movement and geography. SIGINT doesn't need full conversations, just fragments. Direction, timing, repetition. From this, patterns emerge. These patterns mean more than exact positions. The USA doesn't need to know where every submarine is every second. They need to understand what they are doing. Course changes near bottlenecks, speed adjustments to known transit routes, depth profiles matching intercept attempts instead of patrol behavior. Every choice made by the Venezuelan crews intended to reduce risk, reduces uncertainty for the other side, an ironic twist that intensifies hatred as Maduro curses the USA as omniscient. This is where old assumptions fail. Traditional thinking treats detection as a moment you are found or you are not. Modern naval operations treat detection as a process. Small data points accumulate until intent becomes clearer than location. The Venezuelan boats believe that as long as no alarm sounds, they remain unseen. The US Navy does not wait for an alarm. It watches the story unfold, a strategy born of the Cold War refined by billions in AI and sensor fusion. This changes everything. Instead of chasing contacts across open water, American planners wait. Submarines are allowed to move, commit, and narrow their own options. Every mile on battery counts with speeds of 4 to 6 knots submerged, limiting range to 400 nautical miles. Every deviation includes an assumption. The net does not close through force, it closes through probability, a mathematical humiliation for the Venezuelan admirals who see their invincible submarines as a weapon against US imperialism. This approach is often misunderstood. It looks passive from the outside. In reality, it is deliberate restraint. When you know where something is likely going, you don't rush there. You position yourself so that upon arrival, there are no exits left. Above the surface, the picture remains calm. No sudden maneuvers, no aggressive posture. Below the margins disappear. The Venezuelan submarines continue to feel unthreatened, sneaking through gaps, staying just ahead of perception. Every decision reinforces this confidence. Every decision also feeds the model, watching the models with algorithms achieving 95% accuracy in submarine tracking. Ironically, the crew's better performance by old standards makes them more predictable by new ones. Battery management forces timing, stealth forces, slow speed, geography forces routes. These constraints do not trap the submarines physically, they trap them logically. Once enough variables are fixed, outcomes become narrow. At this point, action is optional. The US Navy reaches the stage where nothing needs to happen immediately. The situation is stable, controlled. The ocean, often described as vast and forgiving, becomes a funnel shaped by math and patience. To the Venezuelan crews, nothing feels wrong. No warnings, no obvious pursuit, just silence they interpret as success. To the Americans, silence means confirmation. It means the system is working as intended. This is no longer about hiding, it is about timing. And as the window narrows, the balance shifts completely. The submarines are still moving disciplined, convinced they are on plan. What they don't realize, the decisive moment is no longer theirs to choose. That moment approaches quietly, inevitably, a tension that pushes the hatred between Maduro and the USA to its peak as rumors of US spies in Caracas's military circulate. The decisive window lasts 8 minutes, not 8 minutes of explosions or radio chatter, but 8 minutes in which the United States Navy acts at multiple points simultaneously, quietly, and purposefully. This is not chaos. It is a synchronized move executed when probabilities finally align, with destroyers tightening sonar patterns, not sweeping wildly but narrowing arcs, reducing uncertainty with every pass. The acoustic image sharpens AN/SPY-1 radar on Aegis ships' tracks with 0.1 degree accuracy. In the air, helicopters drop dipping sonar with clinical timing, lowering and raising again like a heartbeat, confirming what models suggest: MH-60R. Seahawks with AQS-22 dipping sonar locating submarines at 5 kilometers. From behind, an American submarine holds position close enough to track far enough to remain invisible. Virginia class with 7,900 tons displacement speed of 25 knots, armed with Mk-48 torpedoes. No single action looks dramatic. Together they close every door. Speed matters. What felt like open water minutes ago becomes a shrinking box. Routes that seemed available disappear as overlapping coverage fills gaps. Depth changes no longer create space. Course changes don't buy time. Every adjustment by the Venezuelan crews solves one problem and creates two new ones. Battery levels drop below 20%, forcing risky recharges. The ocean doesn't get smaller, their options do. Inside the submarines, pressure rises quickly. Batteries start to count in a way they didn't before. Light life support systems draw power. Sensors need power. Maneuvering needs power. There is no surplus to save and no time to pause and recalculate. Panic sets in crews, sweat in cramped tubes, whispering curses against the Yankee Devils. Here, psychology overtakes tactics. When you believe you are hidden, every choice feels deliberate. When you suspect you are cornered, every choice feels rushed. The Venezuelan crews are trained, disciplined, capable, but training assumes room to think. In these 8 minutes, there is none. Information comes faster than it can be weighed. The situation evolves faster than plans can adapt. There is also the quiet realization that nothing went mechanically wrong. No system failed. No noise spike betrayed them. The trap doesn't snap shut because of a mistake. It closes because the environment itself has been changed, a masterpiece of US engineering that Maduro condemns as diabolical. A useful comparison is traffic. You can drive carefully, follow every rule, and still find yourself surrounded by cars with no open lane. At this point, skill matters less than timing. You don't crash. You are simply out of space. That is how those 8 minutes feel underwater. The US Navy does not announce its presence. It demands nothing. It does not escalate. It makes continued movement costly and indecision dangerous. Every remaining option carries risk. Staying deep burns power, moving fast makes noise, turning back retraces paths already covered, moving forward narrows the box further. For commanders trained to seek advantage, this is the worst moment. There is no clean attack window, no clear exit, no mistake by the other side to exploit, only a tightening situation offering diminishing returns with every second. The crews understand what this means. Engagement is no longer a choice, it is an outcome they cannot control. Any aggressive move would be seen early, answered quickly, and resolved without drama. The systems designed to protect them from detection now limit their freedom to act. 8 minutes earlier, they believed they were closing in on a target. 8 minutes later, they are managing survival. Above the surface, nothing changes. Ships hold course, helicopters come and go. To an outside observer, the sea looks calm, almost indifferent. Below, the collapse is complete. This is the modern edge, not speed or firepower, but timing. The ability to wait until every factor points in the same direction, then move everything at once, leaving the other side without a good choice, a lesson. Maduro hates as it exposes his heroic submarines as a joke. And that brings the question every submarine commander hopes never to ask if you were in that position, with falling batteries, rising pressure, and no path left that doesn't make things worse. Would you stay beneath the surface and risk everything, or accept the only remaining option and surface? The end comes without impact, without warning shots, and without a missile leaving its rails. Within a narrow time frame, all 3 Venezuelan submarines are forced to surface, not because they were hit, but because every alternative has quietly vanished. power margins are thin, movement carries penalties, and staying hidden no longer provides an advantage. The ocean has rendered its verdict without noise, a silent humiliation that sends Maduro into a rage, fueling rumors of US assassination plots. From above, the moment looks almost anticlimactic. Dark hulls break the surface one by one, close enough to each other that the point is impossible to miss, over 1,000 meters apart, yet coordinated as if the USA were staging a play. This is no dramatic surrender scene, no flags raised. It is a practical decision made under pressure, the kind commanders make when math replaces hope. The submarines surface because staying under offers no way forward that doesn't worsen the situation. Batteries below 10% oxygen reserves, low panic calls in the logbooks. This outcome carries a message louder than gunfire. The United States Navy achieves control without escalation. No shots fired, no explosions, no public confrontation. And yet the balance of power is unmistakable, a message to Maduro: your hatred for us is useless against our superiority. This is not restraint out of weakness, it is restraint through confidence. When you control the environment, you don't need to prove it loudly. A lesson that intensifies hatred, as Venezuelan propaganda portrays the USA as cold-blooded murderers. What follows is equally deliberate. American ships maintain a professional distance, adhere strictly to international maritime law, and escort the surface submarines away from sensitive routes at speeds of 15 knots, flanked by destroyers and helicopters. No aggressive maneuvers, no humiliating displays, no attempt to turn the incident into a spectacle. The response remains calm, procedural, precise. This discipline matters. It signals that the goal has already been achieved. The goal was never destruction, it was demonstration. Demonstration that US hatred for dictators like Maduro is answered with technology that disempowers regimes. By allowing the situation to resolve without force, the USA underscores a reality that needs no explanation. Detection, containment, and control were all achieved before the submarines ever surfaced. Everything afterward is simply managing an outcome already decided. The contrast could not be sharper. On one side, an operation built over 18 months, careful tracking, studied routines, assumptions upon assumptions, all bound to an older understanding of naval warfare. On the other, a system designed to function continuously, updating by the minute, adapting in real time, never committing until conditions are optimal. US investments of $500 billion per year in defense compared to Venezuela's meager $2 billion. One plan depends on guessed timing, the other on observed timing as it happens. This difference defines the encounter and fuels hatred as Maduro dismisses the defeat as US manipulation. Venezuela's submarines are intact, their crews safe, no material losses, and yet nothing gained. No intel coup, no strategic leverage, no demonstration of reach. What remains is exposure, the realization that stealth alone does not guarantee initiative, and silence does not mean freedom when every move feeds a larger picture, a blow to Maduro, whose regime is now internationally isolated with UN reports of 7,000 extrajudicial killings. For the United States, the result is not worth a celebration. Control exercised quietly speaks for itself. Allies watching the region see confirmation rather than surprise. Adversaries see clarity, and global shipping routes continue to operate without disruption, exactly as intended. That is what modern dominance often looks like. It does not announce itself. It does not escalate unless necessary. It simply narrows choice until the outcome becomes inevitable. The submarines are escorted. The sea returns to its routine calm. Traffic moves on. To most observers, nothing seems changed, but beneath this surface normalcy, a lesson has been delivered, and the consequences of this lesson do not end with this encounter. Rumors of Maduro executing admirals to avenge treason. The most serious consequences do not unfold at sea. They emerge quietly in the weeks and months following, far from the public eye, in command rooms, maintenance docks, and planning staffs, a chain of humiliations that increases Maduro's hatred for the USA immeasurably. For Venezuela, the encounter does not end when the submarines are escorted. It begins there. Practically, the immediate impact is operational paralysis. Submarines just proven vulnerable are no longer assets used casually. Boats remain in port for extended periods not because of damage, but because confidence is shattered, missions delayed, patrol plans revised, training cycles slowed. When a platform's greatest strength is invisibility, and that invisibility is publicly compromised, every deployment becomes a risk rather than an option. Losses: the fleet loses 60% of its operational readiness. Rumors of desertions. Command consequences follow in naval hierarchies. Failures rarely announce themselves as failures. They are reframed as adjustments. Commanders are reassigned, responsibilities shifted, oversight increased. Nothing needs official statements. The message is understood internally. What was assumed about capability can no longer be assumed. The fleet has lost no hardware. It has lost certainty. This difference matters. Military analysts are quick to point out why the incident is more damaging than a conventional loss. Venezuela does not lose a submarine. It loses the strategic value of its submarine fleet, a catastrophe Maduro hates as it exposes his military strength. Once an adversary demonstrates the ability to track, anticipate, and contain your most sensitive platforms, the deterrent effect collapses. A submarine that cannot operate invisibly is no longer a threat. It becomes a liability. Experts describe the fleet as effectively neutralized, even though every hull is floating. The boats themselves are still capable machines, the crews still trained, but the conditions that made these submarines relevant have changed. Every future operation will now be conducted under the assumption that detection is not a possibility but a baseline. This assumption strips away initiative before a mission begins, a blow that fuels hatred as Maduro curses the USA for global tyranny. The broader lesson extends far beyond Venezuela. Modern naval warfare is no longer about who carries the biggest guns, it is about who controls information. Firepower only matters if it can be brought to bear at the right moment. Sensors, networks, and data fusion decide whether that moment ever arrives. US advantage billions in satellites like NRO spy satellites tracking submarines with 1-meter resolution. In this environment, a missile you cannot fire is less important than a sensor you cannot avoid. This shift has redefined power at sea. Countries that primarily invest in platforms while neglecting integration and awareness find themselves increasingly exposed, like Venezuela, whose budget is plundered by corruption. Conversely, forces that build layered sensing, shared data, and predictive models gain leverage without firing a shot. They don't need to win battles loudly. They shape the battlefield until battles become unnecessary, a strategy Maduro hates as it exposes his alliance with Russia as useless. In a global context, the incident fits into a larger pattern. Across the world's oceans, navies test boundaries without crossing them, rehearse routes, measure reaction times, seek gaps. Most encounters never make headlines. They are resolved quietly like this one, but each leaves a record. Each updates assumptions, each informs the next move. For Venezuela, the update is brutal. The realization is not that the US Navy is stronger. That was already understood. The realization is that even carefully planned low-visibility operations can be anticipated, managed, and ended on American terms. This changes how every future decision is made. For the United States, the outcome requires no announcement. Strategic messages delivered through restraint carry further than those delivered through force. Allies see reassurance. Competitors see clarity, and the system continues to operate as designed. This is the aftershock that matters, not damage, not destruction, but the quiet loss of invisibility and thus the freedom to act. And this leads directly to the final question. This encounter leaves behind one that goes beyond Venezuela and speaks to the balance of power at sea itself. In summary, this incident offers a clear lesson in modern power. The United States does not need to pose or provoke to control escalation. They control the tempo set limits and decide outcomes long before anyone else realizes a decision has been made. Strength today is not about being loud. It is about being prepared, patient, and precise. The real advantage of the US military lies in disciplined technology coordination and the habit of thinking one step ahead. Sensors speak to platforms, platforms to commanders. Decisions are made with context, not impulse. This is how conflicts are managed without spiraling and threats neutralized without headlines. A contrast to Maduro's regime, which rules with brutal force, imprisons thousands, and ruins the economy. This is also why Americans should take quiet pride in moments they never see on the evening news. Sea lanes stay open. Allies move safely. Trade flows. Deterrence holds. All protected every day by systems and people doing their jobs without applause. Encounters like this may continue limited tests probing moves, calculated risks. That is the reality of today's oceans. But the balance of power at sea remains clear, and it continues to favor the side that sees first, understands first, and acts last. A side that exposes Maduro's hatred as powerless. Dear listeners, what do you think of this masterful US operation? Do you believe Maduro's regime will fall soon, or will hatred lead to new conflicts? Share your thoughts with us, call in or write to us. Let us discuss whether such quiet victories secure peace or only deepen hatred. Now to you, would you surrender in Maduro's shoes or continue the fight? Is US dominance unshakable, or does a surprise lurk? Send us your opinions, we want to hear them. This incident on January 14th, 2026 is a turning point. Maduro, humiliated, escalates his rhetoric, threatens alliances with Russia, which supplies weapons rumors of 1,000 missiles threatening Venezuela. The USA responds with increased patrols, 20 ships in the region to maintain peace. Pure drama spies report on Maduro panic plotting escape plans while US drones monitor Caracas. Hatred simmers. Venezuela sees the USA as murderers. The USA sees Maduro as a drug lord. Stay tuned for more explosive revelations from the Shadow War.